Morning. It's Coach Lorri with Coach Brian here for Team
Hello.
Wilpers Cycling. And we were just chatting a little bit before we got started. Brian's moving. I'm traveling. We don't know where the heck we are these days, but what's going on with you, Brian?
Well, I just finally moved into our new house in Vermont. It's another rental. We got kicked out of our other rental early. No,
You
not
need to
that
be
we did.
better
I know.
tenants.
They were like, "You have too many bikes."
Bikes.
They're like, "Sorry, you got to leave." But here, the ironic part here is, so I moved into this little. It's called Orchard Commons. It's like a mile from my house, like where we just were. Like we moved down the road, and my next door neighbor actually works for Vermont Bike Tours.
Oh, awesome.
And the other neighbor next to him works for Sojourn Bike Tours.
Oh, I have a friend who works for Sojourn, and I took a tour to New Zealand with VBT back in the day, 25 years ago.
How crazy! So
I
like
know.
both of my neighbors are like big bikers, so it's awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, moving is never easy, and every time I move, which has been now three times in the last like 2 years because we moved from New York, and every time I do it myself, like all by myself. And
Why?
every single time, because I'm a big believer in you don't ask friends to move.
Right. Well, you pay people to move. That's my
Exactly.
opinion.
Right. I 100% agree. But then it comes down to is like, I'm just too cheap to pay someone to move because I worked for a moving company. I worked for a corporate moving company in New York City for like 4 years. So I'm
Right.
like, it's not that hard. But then 4 days in of like 8 hours of labor, I'm like, why? Like every time I'm like, never again. I'm just going to pay somebody. And then I never pay ever.
I just moved a year ago from Santa Cruz to Capitola. It was only 3 miles, I don't have a lot of stuff, but I still hired someone because, well, the Peloton's heavy,
It's heavy,
but
very heavy.
yeah. Hey, good morning, Aaron and Jeff. Jeff, are you on your way back after
He's
launching the
on a
kid
plane
in college? Yeah, I got to ride with Jeff this weekend, which was awesome, and in Colorado Springs. So I went from Idaho to Colorado, and now I'm in Nebraska, and ended up in Colorado because it was so smoky in Idaho that they canceled the first day of the race.
Mm-hmm.
The second day they held it, and I chose not to race because the air quality was still over 200, which is just ridiculous to me. And by then my anxiety of refreshing the air quality sites over and over and over and over again, I was like, I can't take this. I have to leave. So I changed my flight and ended up in a friend's house. They weren't there by myself in Colorado Springs, and I was like, who do I know here? Oh yeah, Jeff Himes. So we rode bikes. It was awesome.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was great.
Did they end up doing the ride on the weekend? Did they do the long
They
ride?
did the long ride, and the air quality was actually better that day. I would have ridden had I been there, but what I realized was this anxiety of refreshing the screens gave me PTSD back to last year when I came back from France and my bike was lost, and I kept refreshing the Find My and refreshing Lufthansa's bag identification or location stuff. And I was like, I got to get out of here. Anxiety's through the roof. I got to fix this. So I did. It was not an easy travel day. I kind of screwed up my rental car. I thought I reserved it early. I apparently didn't push the final button. So anyways, it was a long day, but a great ride. I had a few nice days in Colorado Springs, which brought back lots of memories of being at the Olympic Training Center. And yesterday I drove from Colorado Springs to Scottsbluff, Nebraska. And
how
I can tell
long
you,
of a drive is that?
it was about 4 hours, 4.5 hours
bad.
maybe.
That's not bad at all.
It's my threshold is usually 4 hours, but I did it. And Eastern Colorado is very flat. Like you can see forever. It's just, they call it, it's a national grasslands. So you know how you have national forests and national parks? This is a national grasslands or meadowlands or something like that. And then
that's where the Giants play, the Meadowlands. Come on, take it to Meadowlands.
And then you get into Nebraska, and it was quite lovely, actually. There's a lot of corn, but I'm in an area where these bluffs, right? So these geological structures, almost like the hoodoos in Utah. And I haven't been outside to ride yet. I'm going to go a little later today, and we'll see how it goes. But it's funny, humid here.
I texted you. I did Steamboat with Francesco, who's blind, and then I just realized because you said you're doing nationals, so I started looking at it. And I was looking at the categories. They have a blind tandem category for national championship in
do.
gravel, which we had no idea because
Yeah.
USAT and paracycling is not very good at actually informing people about what's going on. Even like their national road championships, like we usually find out like 4 weeks before the race. Like it's
Right.
crazy. Like it's like, come on, like a little bit of planning could be good.
Yeah.
But we saw, I was like, we could have done that instead. That would have been so much more
Yeah.
fun. So I think we're looking at it for next year. So if you go next year, I'll be there with Francesca.
Oh, well, you know I'm there next year because this year is my dress rehearsal for next year. This year I'm 59, so I'm the last year of my age group. Next year I'm 60. So I'll be the kid in my age group, which should hopefully give me some advantage. We'll see. But it's going to be in Wisconsin. So right on the border of Wisconsin and Minnesota. I had to think about that for a minute. Or cool. Michigan. So it'll be pretty cool. Yeah. Hi, Maggie. Somebody else showed up. Oh, Linda's here too.
Amy Murphy
Good morning,
showed up.
everybody. Yeah. Amy. Hi. Amy's always here. She was a little late today. What's going on, Amy? You were late. Anyways, so here I am in Scottsbluff, and I don't know where I am, and I've already locked my key in my room once, and thankfully haven't had any other drama at this point. But yeah, it's hot and humid here, I will say. I got in last night close to 7. It got dark at 7:15. It was like, oh yeah, hey, there's Larry who does the big distance. Good job, Larry. And yeah, it was like 90 degrees at 7 o'clock, and then it got dark. I was like, okay, but it gets light very early, which makes sense because we race really early. So we'll see how that goes. I like 6:30 or 7. So
hot late is not my deal. Don't like that.
No. Well, I have to say I'm happy to be back in some humidity because my skin and especially my hands, cleaning bikes every day, and my nails have been really dry and painful. And when you work with your hands, you don't want painful hands. So I'm happy to be here in a little bit of humidity.
You got to get Bag Bomb. That's like the Vermont product, Bag Bomb.
I went out for a ride this morning. I used to use that for chamois cream.
Yeah, I was out for a ride today. 50 degrees this morning.
Yeah,
in Vermont. Like that's
not what we got at home. Yeah. Bag Bomb's great, by the way. If anyone ever has issues with saddle sores or chafing or anything, you can also use it after the fact. A lot of people will. It's a healing balm. It's lanolin. But back in the day, before there were good chamois creams, I used to use that, and it would leave this. Well, first of all, it doesn't come out of your clothing. So if you wash your kit, it really doesn't come out of the chamois. So eventually you get this nice, always lubricated chamois, and you would get this kind of sheen on your saddle of shiny, greasy, like you greased it.
Just sliding all over the place.
Yeah. Ooh. But it's good stuff. And they come in little tiny tins too. So I used to travel with those. But anyways, what do we got going on? I want to give a quick shout out to Richard McVeigh. He had a really good question yesterday, and that's going to lead us into our topic for the day, which is efficiency in cycling. And what does that mean? And what do we think, Brian? What do you think of when you think of efficiency? We had some great answers yesterday on the Facebook group.
Well, I think you can't talk about efficiency without talking about effectiveness.
Okay.
Right. I think you got to talk about both of them because from a human movement perspective, biomechanic perspective, I always look at this when we're doing bike fits. And I always have this conversation with my bike fit clients at the end, especially. And I'm like, always remember your brain kind of categorizes movements in 2 ways. What's the most effective way to move, or what's the most efficient way to move?
So what's the difference between effective and efficient?
Good question, Lorri. So most effective way. Think about like picking up a box. Mm-hmm. Right? We know bend your knees, back straight, right? Let's do this biomechanically properly. Right? So that is what I mean by effectiveness. The best way to pedal a bike, the most effective way to pedal a bike is, we know, proper pelvis position. Rotate that pelvis forward, long torso, drive through the heels, get the glutes involved. We know that's the most effective way to do it. Now, when we're doing something short, hard, lifting a box, the brain's usually going to pick the most effective way, the safest way, the strongest way. When we're doing something for a long period of time, the brain's actually going to pick the most efficient way. And efficiency is about energy use, not about what's the strongest way to do something. And the most efficient way is not always the correct way. The efficient way is the way you've been doing it for a very long time, because the body has now fine-tuned that motor pattern to use extra muscles that it doesn't need, right? It's fine-tuned this. So a lot of times, like if you have a long riding history, you're very efficient at your pedal stroke. The problem is that pedal stroke might not be effective.
Right.
And if we change it, well, now you have this, your brain has this debate every time you're about to do something of like, oh, well, do I do the effective way or do I do the efficient way? It's always going to choose the efficient way unless you are actively thinking about changing this motor pattern. So that's the hard part, right?
So that's where adaptation comes in. If I change someone's bike fit and they immediately think they're going to, blow their numbers out of the water and they don't, then they're disappointed.
Yes.
Because it's not just about the position I'm in, it's about how I'm using my body in that new position. And if I don't train the more efficient way, it's not going to be as effective. Did I say that correctly?
No,
or did I
If
reverse
you don't train the most effective way, it's not going to become efficient. So the way I kind of explain to my clients is, think of it as you have two motor patterns, because that's really what happens. Your body doesn't get rid of a motor pattern, it just keeps it. And so option A is what you've been doing for the last 3 years, we'll say, right? But as long as you've been riding, this is what you've been doing. And then we say, okay, well, we're going to change this. We're going to change it to option B here, right? We know option B is much more effective than option A. So what you're going to do is you're going to practice this. This is like the single leg drills and stuff like that we talked about, right? And this is how to kind of spur, and we'll talk about single leg drills too. So you're going to practice this new motor pattern. So I tell them before every interval, right? Every workout's work, rest, work, rest. The problem is the moment you stop thinking about your effectiveness, you're going to revert back to your most efficient. And I don't know anybody that can hold their attention for 45 minutes straight, right? Like I'm good for 3. Maybe. So what I always say is like, all right, let's practice the effectiveness during the most important time during the work interval. So before the work interval starts, the first thing you do is think about your posture. Let's get it set, shoulders back, pelvis forward, heels down. Let's get ready to work. And then during the interval, what are we thinking about? Drive the heels, drive the heels, drive the heels, drive the heels. Because we can only think about one thing at a time. It's happening so fast. And then when the interval's over, stop thinking. Take a break. Just sit up, move around, get out of position, whatever. And then next interval, get back into position again. Shoulders back, pelvis forward, drop those heels, drive, 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 drive. Because now we're creating an association for my brain. Every time I work, I get in this position. Every time I work, what I do, drive my heels, drive my heels, drive my heels. So I'm practicing it in the most efficient, effective manner I can at that time over time. And this is the hard part. I tell my clients, it's 1 month for every year you've been cycling. Okay. Now it usually doesn't take that long.
I'll be good by the time I'm 70, right?
So it usually takes like 2 to 3 months for a long-term cyclist. But if you're newer to cycling, a year or two, you might get this down in a year or two, or a month or two. Is what we're doing is option A is always there. We're practicing option B. And the more I practice option B, it starts to, now my brain says, hey, I'm really efficient at this. This is as equally as efficient as the other one, and it's more effective. It just puts A back in the closet. It's like, well, let's screw it. We don't need that. We're just going to stay in this one, right? But it takes time, right? Efficiency is gained over time. So if you're new to cycling, you're not going to be very efficient at spinning at 90 RPM, right? It's not effective.
You'll be really good at 55 or 60 because that's what feels natural to you. Yeah.
Right.
And it's hard to convince someone without the science. Right.
Yeah, well, the easiest science. I can't remember if I did this with you or not, but our people that are watching right now and watching later, it's called Fitt's Law, right? And this is something that we learn. Is called there's a speed accuracy trade-off. The faster you do a skill, the more the skill breaks down, right? The less accurate you become. So I do this with the kids all the time and with my clients. Just go ahead and put your hand straight out in front of you, pointing a finger. Bend just your elbow and touch your nose. No, like this. Come on, bend your elbow, touch your nose.
Oh,
not that hard, right? Now, do this like
it's way out there.
Do this like 50 RPMs, right? Like no problem. Now, do it 100 RPMs. Go fast.
I'm gonna poke myself in the eye.
Totally right. That's why I'm wearing glasses, right?
But if I focus just on push, 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 not push, pull, it was easy.
Well, that's one. But the whole idea here is when I do it slow, 100% accuracy, no problem. Yeah. The moment I speed it up, my accuracy breaks down. So think about.
Which is an interesting point.
Pedaling.
Jackie yesterday was talking about pedaling high cadence. She's a very, she's a masher. It's okay. That's not an insult. But she likes 70 to 80 RPMs. And she was talking about yesterday's class, which was from last week, a workout where there was 100 RPM cadence and how hard it is for her. And yes, it is hard. You feel like your feet aren't under you, but you just have to do it. And eventually your body is going to be adapted to doing it.
Yes.
But if you don't try, you're not
or
going to get
what
there.
you do is you say, all right, well, how long have you been cycling? Right. So
Mhm.
we've been cycling for 30 plus years.
Right.
So the amount of times that we've done the pedal stroke is, I can't even begin to fathom.
That's big
right.
math.
So our skill set allows us to do it at a faster rate without breaking down. The newer you are to this, the more the skill is going to break down as you speed it up.
Right.
So what I would say is, like, if you're struggling at, let's say, 110, well, what I want you to do is get really comfortable at 100 and 105, and then get up into 110. But once you lose it, once you start to bounce, or once you feel like you lost it, get out of it. Drop back down, regain control, and come back into it. Because again, we got to practice the effectiveness of that pedal stroke. And if I'm now with a crappy pedal stroke and bouncing all over the place, what am I practicing?
Right.
I'm practicing
bad
form. And the brain's like, hey, this is successful.
Right.
I'm hitting 110, bouncing around like crazy. But the brain's like, we're doing it. That's not what I want. I want 110 nice and still. Right. So I got to back out of that.
Think of the guys at the gym doing bicep curls with their entire body, or, trap pull downs. And we want to do things correctly. Why? Because long-term we'll be more efficient. And also we're going to prevent injury that way.
Yes. And it's skill acquisition. That's always the thing. I'm trying to acquire this skill.
Right.
Once the skill breaks down, you're not acquiring it anymore.
Right.
So I got to back out and come back into it. And that's the thing, is like this efficiency and effectiveness it's everything we do. It's everything. And then from a bike fitter's perspective, like, that is all I'm looking at when somebody's on the bike. Like, I'm just looking at, like, is your body in the proper position to even be effective? Right. Like, if your pelvis is rotated back or you're slouching, like, your glutes can't work. So,
and it brings up a good point when we look at bike fit. It's not one and done. And especially in the Peloton world, we look at, I'll fit someone and we change their position. It changes their pedal dynamics. Now they practice. We don't do a ton of technique in bike fit, but they can come back and have a technique session, and then we're going to teach them that. Larry makes a really good point here. 120 RPMs on the Peloton is easy, quite different in the wild, meaning outside. And I will say, when you're working on a weighted flywheel, by the way, they have one here at the gym, but the saddle is like this. I was like, ooh, I guess I'm not going to get on that bike anytime soon.
You're going to fix it before you leave.
I know. I already asked him for a 13 millimeter wrench. I was like, can I fix your Peloton for you? They're like, we'll get you a wrench. Anyways, so yes, I often say the Peloton will continue to pedal you for a while, right? So when you have a weighted flywheel and it's fixed gear, same thing on a track bike, it will continue to pedal you. It's a lot easier, I think, in that respect, to pedal the high cadences than outside. You have to be in control. You have to shift. You have to do everything you need to do. So, and there's changes with terrain and wind and everything else. So yeah, definitely. There are a lot of things I think that are, hey, I'm waving, Jeff. Good to see you.
And the flywheel too changes the dynamic of how we pedal, how we absorb the pedal stroke over the top of the pedal stroke as well.
Yes.
A lot of that bouncing is doing literally because the pedal's picking you up out of the saddle. You're not actually absorbing the top of the pedal stroke. And that happens in track cycling as well, like understanding how to slow the bike down, forcing, not pushing backwards, but braking against the pedals. Yeah, there are two different.
Interesting. I ended the winter after being on the Peloton primarily for 4 months and doing high volume. I was doing 16 to 20 hours a week on the Peloton. And I have an interesting biomechanical issue with my hips. And I have I had surgery on one hip and some insufficiency in the glutes on that side. And I thought I was crazy because my efficiency numbers, and I think I posted this in the post, were it was showing me being very quad dominant on the right side, or very dominant on the right side and less so on the left. And the reality was the glutes and the hamstrings on the right side don't work as well. And so the unloading phase of my pedal stroke wasn't helping my left side. My left side was actually more efficient. And by the end of the winter, those 4 months, I could grab my butt. And I know that sounds weird, but I could grab my butt and physically feel that my
Feel the difference.
right side was smaller than my left side. And it's taken me until about now to feel like I'm pretty even again. So I may rethink whether I use a trainer or the Peloton this winter for all my indoor training. And gosh, I
Yeah.
just hope I don't have to do 4 months on the indoor
No,
trainer
my
again
guess
this
is
year.
a lot of times it's about doing both. Right. It's
Right.
about mixing the two, right? Because
Yeah.
as long as you're mixing the two, the brain's still going to understand how to ride. Or
Mhm.
because again, riding a Peloton bike and riding a regular road bike outside, we deal with forces differently. So again, the brain views this, it's the chaos theory. You change one little thing, as far as the brain is concerned, it's a completely different activity. Right. Now the fitness carries over.
The
You know,
cardiovascular fitness. Also
cardiovascular fitness
muscular
carries over.
endurance.
So muscular. Now those motor unit fibers might be different that we're using indoors and outdoors. And the same thing from a triathlon TT bike and a road bike.
Right.
Right. Like, yes, it carries over, but it is a different pedaling. We are pedaling through because our posture is so different, our orientation
Yeah.
is so different that, you know, we're going through a different range of motion in the hip where the power phase is. Right. So now instead of, I'm just making up numbers, instead of the power phase being angle 20 to 30 on a road bike, it's now 25 to 35 on a TT bike. Right. So the brain has to understand that that power force is someplace else. And that's going to be a different motor unit recruitment of which fibers are firing off. So same thing with the Peloton. That's why using both is really important.
Yeah.
And why you see people on the tour, when their TT's coming up, they're cooling down on their TT bike or they're warming up on their TT bike because they're trying to get back into understanding what this motor pattern is. It doesn't go away, but we got to remember what it is. So
and
I'd
it
say,
makes me think back
two.
20 years. I used to train outside in the winter on a fixed gear bike, on a track bike with one brake. It was a little terrifying. But yeah, you're using your body very differently that way. But it trains high cadence really well because as soon as you start going downhill, you're like, whoa, 140, 160, 180 RPMs. Don't do that
it's
anymore.
amazing.
So,
yeah, we did through the city all the time. And that gets
Yeah.
to like the single legs, right? Like, or the efficiencies is should my left side and my right side be even? Should I be 50-50? Like, is that the expectation? Like, should everyone
Right.
expect to be there? That's like, what's your thought on that?
Well, and the underlying question is how accurately are our power meters estimating left-right balance? And what we also don't know is where in the phase of the pedal stroke is that difference. And so I think we have to, and I when I retook my power training with Hunter, he had said that most of them are off by like, if they're like 52-48, and there's a reason for that because of the drivetrain. So yeah, I would say if we're within, I've always thought if we're within about 4 percentage points, that's even to me. And
What percentage point?
4. So if
4,
I have like
I would say 5.
48, yeah.
Yeah, I let it go up to about 6%, 5 to 6% without me having any concern whatsoever.
Right.
And then the next thing I always ask is, well, have you looked at your left-right balance when you're doing a hard interval compared to when you're riding easy?
Right.
Because most likely the difference is happening when you're riding easy, when the body's not worried about being as effective. Right. So it's kind of just easing off a little bit, and the dominant side's probably going to become dominant as we all have a dominant side.
Right.
Right. So now if you're 50-50 on those hard intervals, I'm not concerned at all because the body's doing exactly what it needs to do when it has to do it. Yeah. And that's just a coordination thing, right? One side's smoother than the other side, things of that nature. So,
but like you said, we don't always know which side is which because of the phases of the pedal stroke.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And I agree with that. When I go out and do endurance rides, my numbers are much greater, the differential there. So I might see 55-45, maybe not quite that much, but more significant versus I might be 51-49 when I'm doing hard efforts. So yeah, we get lazy when we don't have resistance. So that's good.
And then, you know, that brings me into single leg drills because I have a love-hate relationship with single leg drills. Pedaling single leg is very inefficient.
Yeah.
Right. Because we then have to kind of focus on the upstroke on the back end. And the upstroke is not something I believe we should be focusing on. It doesn't add to our power. It's not an assistive force that we once believed it to be. All right. So the old thought was once we started clipping in the late 70s was like, hey, we can pull up on the pedal stroke now. This is great. Right. And in theory, it makes sense. Right. But now I'm talking seated, not standing. Right. So when we're seated and we're, one foot's in the front, one foot's in the back. And, think about it like in a pen. If I push down on one end, the other end's going to come up, right? So if I push down on the pedal, my back foot comes up. So that thought was like, great, if I pull up here, it's going to help this push, but it doesn't.
And our body's not meant to do that.
Right. Well, first off, it's in a horrible biomechanical position
Right.
to actually pull up, which is why I said seated. Standing's a little different because your hip flexor straight. Biomechanically, it works a little bit better. But seated, so this back foot is in a horrible position to produce power. Your front foot's in the ideal position to push power, right?
But now, back foot is good at unweighting.
Unweighting, exactly. Yeah. Right. So, but now if I pull, what happens is I pull the pedal down towards the floor, which means I'm pulling it away from my foot that's trying to push it. So I'm actually taking power away from my front foot by applying it to my back foot. So I'm not gaining anything. I'm just moving the work to my poor hip flexor that should be doing the work anyway. And yes, to your point, Lorri, the idea is not to pull up. The idea is, let's say my foot has weight, right? And this is a scale. Let's say my foot just weighs, I don't know, 5 watts. That means I need to push 6 watts for my pedal to actually move, right? I got to overcome the 5 watts and add at least a watt for movement to occur. So the idea is to unweight your foot, not to pull up. So that extra 5 watts goes to the pedal, not to lifting my foot. And so it's not about pulling, it's about unweighting. And that's a very,
and that's why
we can't do that in a single leg drill.
The emphasis on the heel drive. So coming over the top of the pedal stroke and driving that heel down. And that's where I often use the analogy of throwing a ball, right? I can throw a ball with my wrist, which is kind of the pullback. I can throw a ball with my wrist and my arm, which is the pullback, pull up, or I can wind up, extend my arm and throw and follow through. That's the piece that's missing, the wind up. And that's the part that's most important, I think. And, you hear the instructors talk about pulling back, scraping back, pulling up. And it's like, I really want to think about driving down. That's going to set me up for doing the rest of it. But
yeah, there's for sure. And then I think the other hard part too with like the single leg drill is it does force us to pull up on this pedal stroke, which is something I don't really want to do. I want to unweight. And the other thing is it's not a unilateral exercise. Like cycling is not unilateral. It's bilateral. It's reciprocal. One leg's doing the opposite of the other leg. So I'm fine with doing single leg drills. I do think there's a lot of benefit to doing a single leg drill. But there's ways we can do a single leg drill. And especially if you have trouble clipping in and clipping out, right? Like you're like, oh, I got to stop to clip in. If you can't clip in and clip out, like in the flow
while you're pedaling,
then I totally suggest not clipping out for a single leg drill. What I suggest doing is just focus on your left leg for 30 seconds or 20 seconds, and then focus on both legs together, and then focus on your right leg for that period of time, and then both feet together, and then left side. Because I don't want to go left to just right to left, because the idea of drilling something is to drill it and then add it back into the normal skill. Right. So I want to understand what this feels like, but I also want it to understand what it feels like together. How do I do that same motion now with the other foot? So there has to be a transition. Go left foot, both feet, right foot, both feet, left foot, both feet, right foot. And you can do this while you're riding outside without clipping out at all, which will allow this upstroke to be much more natural.
The other challenge with a single leg drill in the way that we traditionally did it, right? You would unclip and put your back, whether you were outside or on a trainer, is you change your pelvic position. So it's very hard to keep the pelvis stable when you're unclipped and rotated on one side. So yes, and I know that Matt now, when he teaches them in his classes, he doesn't have people unclip. We used to 20 years ago. Let me tell you how much fun that was. It was like a circus in spin class. I'd be like picking people off the floor while I'm teaching. But I want to mention a couple of questions that are coming up here. And Larry has a really good one. Larry, I'm guessing you haven't been fit on your Peloton. And I would say that would probably be a really good step, because we found we can fit you really, really well on your Peloton. And it doesn't have to emulate your road bike fit or your tri-bike fit or your mountain bike fit. Yeah, it's a very different animal. And you can still be in a position where, like we said earlier, you're going to get the cardiovascular fitness primarily, the muscular endurance, and you're going to be super efficient inside. And That's okay. It's going to be different. I own multiple bikes. So does Brian. We won't tell you
Mhm.
how many because that's a really personal question. But all of my bikes are fit slightly differently,
Yeah.
and I
My
can
view is
ride them
always
all.
they shouldn't look the same, they should feel the same. Right?
Right.
Like it's about promoting the forward body lean. It's about promoting this. Like, are we engaging the same way?
Right.
But yeah, no, our one of the things for our handlebars being so low outside is aerodynamics,
Aerodynamics.
but mainly for bike handling purposes, right? It helps. I always say think of it like a scale. If I drop this end, I move weight forward, or kids on a seesaw. And the idea is outside, we want the weight to be in the middle at the fulcrum point, which is our legs, right? I want to
Right.
be equally balanced front to back. If the handlebars are too high, it starts to throw weight back to my saddle and I'm going to be off balance. Indoors, if the handlebars are too low, the brain's like, I don't have to lean forward.
Right.
So its instinct is to push and commit to your saddle, and that throws your posture off, right? So that's the thing is
Yeah.
like we want the same feel of this leaning forward, but the platform needs to be different because of the space that we're in and
Hmm.
what we're being asked to do neurologically from a movement perspective.
Yeah.
So yeah, they should not look the same, but they should really
No.
feel the same.
But they should
Even
look like a
my
bike. I will say this. We
That's
see
true,
a lot
yes.
of clients who, people will say, whether it's on Facebook or in the Peloton store, oh, it doesn't matter what you do with your handlebar. Put it all the way up.
Worse.
As you get fitter, you can move it down. Leads to so much discomfort and
Yes.
bad pedaling dynamics because as we're upright, what are we doing? We're just pushing down with our
Hmm.
quads, putting stress in the knee, putting stress in the
Yes.
lower part of the leg, and not using the glutes, not using the hamstrings, not engaging the core. So that's where people have all this discomfort. If I'm too far forward or too high, that's going to
Hmm.
cause
Yeah,
all kinds of issues.
the handlebars to me are like the biggest thing that drive me crazy. It's like that it doesn't matter. Oh, it matters big time.
Yeah.
And the hard part is most people, the problem is again, there's always a window. I'm okay in this
Hmm.
window. If I'm too high, the problem is when you're too high and you're too low, the results are the same. You get
Right.
pressure in your hands and your posture is wrong. Like
Hmm.
it's just going to happen. The the pressure in the hands is not a leaning pressure most people are feeling when their handlebars are in the wrong spot. The pressure in the hands that they feel is a pushing pressure. If the
Right.
handlebars are not in a good place for me to lean against, right? It's too far away from me or it's too high up in the air. I
Or it's
can't
too
lean
close.
against it or it's too close. My instinct is to do what? Push it away and commit to my saddle so I
Yeah.
get pressure by pushing. And once we get those handlebars in the right place, people are like, wow, I love moving people's handlebars down.
Right.
I'm like, how do your hands feel? They're like
No
lighter.
pressure. Yeah.
They're like lighter. And I'm like, yeah, you didn't
Because
expect
the
that,
core
did
is
you?
engaged as well. I think that when I'm sitting upright, my hands are up. Oftentimes I get lazy
Mhm.
and I get this little
Slouch.
curve
I'm
in the
slouching
back.
right now.
Exactly. I'm on
So,
this really janky rolly chair right now. I'm
yeah.
like trying not to slouch. But Larry, that's a really good question. And happy to chat more about bike fit. I mean, I think everyone knows that Brian and I both fit thousands
Both
and
of us,
thousands of Pelotons
people
over
a
the last
year.
4 years. And
Yeah,
it is it is absolutely possible to have a really good fit on your Peloton, and it doesn't have to look like your road bike.
yeah.
Um,
When people think that it doesn't matter, my basically response is, I've been running a bike fit as you have. I've been running a bike
right.
fit studio for 20 years,
Hmm.
right? I choose to do these Peloton bike fits. Like, yes, during COVID, we kind of had to, but post
Right.
COVID, like I chose to continue doing this because I find it so important. Like almost more so than outside. Outside bikes are built in a way where the frame is basically going, as long as you have the right size frame for you, it's going to basically get you in a pretty healthy position, right?
Hmm.
Yes, there's still posture controls and stuff like that and stem lengths, but like your saddle is going to be pretty much in the right spot minus the height. As far as forward and after, where these Peloton bikes, it's like jello. Like it's like you can put this
And
thing wherever you want. And it's just like, oh
right.
man, like there's no guidance there. And
No.
that's why, like, I mean, I don't care if you've been riding for 20 years outside, you should still get a bike fit on your Peloton bike because
Hmm.
most likely you're matching your bike to look like your outside bike.
Right.
And that I can tell
And
you right off the bat, that's not the right way.
And it's interesting to me because it's usually the road riders and the triathletes who say, "Oh, I just did this bike fit just to make sure I was okay because I think I'm okay." And usually they're not even close. So, yeah. The other thing I was going to say, Larry, about feedback, and let's talk about feedback versus cueing. Larry says, if I'm out in the wild, I'm on the rivet, meaning in the right place on the saddle forward.
Mhm.
And Matt Wilpers and other instructors tend to tell Peloton riders to sit all the way back on the saddle. When the instructors are giving you a cue, they don't actually see you. It's not individual feedback. It's not like they know you're too far forward and they want you to sit further back. They're often just giving general cueing and basing that on kind of the general population who maybe doesn't know where they belong. And maybe a better piece of feedback would be, I want to feel my pelvic bones. I want to feel connected to the saddle. I want to be on the widest part of the saddle. Telling someone who's already in the right position to move further back doesn't make sense, right? So,
Yeah,
so
I always,
take the cueing with a grain of salt. If you're already there, that's great. But there are other
yeah,
people who aren't. You would be surprised at how many people sit on the nose of the saddle and they think that's where they belong. Nope.
yeah.
That
Or their
is,
saddle's too high and they have to slide to the nose of the saddle to reach the pedals, things like that. And I
yeah.
always say is like, always try to remember where these cues came from originally, and sometimes they get changed, right? And the easiest way to explain this one, or maybe not the easiest way, but the good and parallel is thinking about like overstriding when you're running is a bad
Mm-hmm.
thing. Well, if you overstride, you are definitely going to hit your heel, right? Like it's impossible to overstride and land on your forefoot.
Right.
So heel striking became bad because, well, heel striking was never bad. Overstriding was bad. Heel striking was just a cheap, easy way to get to the mass public, right?
Yeah.
Now, the same thing with the sit back, push back. What was that originally from? Well, let's think about when, I'm racing and my coach is trying to remind me something as I'm going past that 25 miles an hour. He can't say, "Hey, Brian, remember to rotate your pelvis forward and drive with the heels," right? Like I'm gone after he said, "Hey, Brian," right? So
Right.
for me, it was always back in the saddle, back in the saddle. It meant to push your sit bones back into the saddle. When I rotate my pelvis forward, my sit bones get pushed back into the saddle. Back in the saddle, back in the saddle, rotate your pelvis, drive, right? So a lot of times the cues that we get, and remember, these instructors are put in a really tough position that they are coaching thousands of people in a class. Not only just think about the tens of thousands that they're coaching that they don't, like you said, get to see. So they're using a lot of cues that are correct normal cues, but would be specifically given at a time. They're trying to coach people, that have never heard it, or maybe they, so during my bike fit, I usually go through, we're talking about relaxing your shoulders. We're talking about your proper posture. We're talking about proper heel drive, things of that nature. And then I'll say, listen, when you hear an instructor say, relax your shoulder girdle, that doesn't mean down.
Yeah.
And listen, everybody out there right now, if when they say relax your shoulders, if you start to hold your shoulders down, that's not relaxing, right? Holding your shoulders anywhere is not relaxing. So do not depress your shoulders. That's not relaxing. If your shoulders are up, if you're relaxing, your shoulders are up, your handlebars are probably too high. As I lift my elbows, my shoulders go up. That's number one. So I always say relaxing your shoulders. What does that mean for you? That means shoulders back, chest drops in between. When they say sit in the widest part of the saddle, sit back, what does that mean? Push your sit bones back in the saddle. Check your pelvis position. When they mention something about the pedal stroke, I'm like, okay, think about driving the heels, pressure through the ball of the foot. Like always come up with like, what are the cues that you constantly hear and what should they mean for you? So that they ring that bell. It's hard. I feel bad for Matt and his instructors to try to, like, for years, I wouldn't even talk to him.
It was so much easier to teach in person where
class.
I could go and touch someone and I can see them and
say, Larry, do this. Like, like you could point it out. These guys don't have that ability, these coaches. And it's really hard. And then a lot of these instructors, not Matt, obviously, cyclists. They're not cyclists or they're not cycling coaches, which is different. They're indoor instructors, right? So they're teaching from a spin class mentality, not from a cycling biomechanic mentality. And this comes down to foot position. Totally.
The hand position, the foot position. If you want to see good ergonomics, look at the folks who actually ride. Christine, Matt, they're outdoor riders, and they have good posture on the bike. They know how to position their pelvis. It's all about the pelvis, in my opinion. If you can't get the pelvis stable and in the right position, nothing else works.
Well, glute activity happens for two things have to occur for your glutes to fire off. You have to have your pelvis anterior tilted, rotated forward. If your pelvis is rotated backwards, you're sitting straight up, right? If pelvis is rotating backwards, your glutes do not have the leverage to actually fire off. They can't work. Okay. So think like cow pose, cat cow pose, right? Like, so in this kind of long torso posture. So pelvis has to be in the proper position. That's your light switch. And then your heel has to drive. If you drive through your toes, you are going to be knee dominant. If you drive through your heel, your brain will think about extending your hip. Drive through your toes, your brain will think about extending your knee. So we have to ask the glute to work by driving the heel. We have to allow the glute to be able to work by having the light switch on, by having your pelvis rotated forward. If those two things don't happen, if one of those two doesn't happen, your glutes are not going to fire off the way that they should, and you're going to be quad dominant. So every time they're like, engage your glutes, engage your glutes, engage your glutes, that should ring a bell to you of, where's my pelvis? What's my foot doing?
Yeah. Everything else should fall into place if your bike is fit correctly. Correct. A couple more quick comments. Jeff, you mentioned, why is your hand position asymmetrical? Maybe
I don't know.
Saddle is asymmetrical. Maybe your spine is asymmetrical, or your pelvis is asymmetrical, or you should just pay more attention and put your hands.
Yeah, the first thing is acknowledging. The first thing is acknowledging that they're not correct, and then the second thing is just correct it. Right? So a lot of times,
I will say we're not all symmetrical. I'm a very good example of that. And if you look at the bar tape on my bike, because my pelvis and my spine over the years have definitely created some asymmetries. You can see one of my shoulders is higher when I ride. You can see, well, Jeff rode behind me. He can probably see a lot of that. And my hands are in slightly different positions. And for years, we were taught as fitters to fit people symmetrically, right? We're going to force the body to be symmetrical. And when you do that for me, I end up with pain. So,
so now that's
maybe my hood position is a little different.
That's always a tough one too, because some people do have externally rotated feet and stuff like this. The question that you do have to ask yourself, though, is, can that asymmetric be fixed?
Right.
Should we allow you to fall into that position? Just because you go in that position, or you sit crooked or something like this, do I have to allow you to do it on the bike? Because biomechanically, it'd be better for you to be here. So something we would look at in human movement was, is this a morphological constraint?
Right.
Like morphological means that your body, your hips are made that way. Then there's nothing we can do about this, or there's nothing we can do about this right now. But if you're doing the appropriate work afterwards, maybe 6 months down the road, we can correct this on the bike as well. We got to fit you for where you are right now. But the question is always, just because you stand with your feet out doesn't mean that your feet have to be out when you're cycling. Can we do this? If it's possible, this is better biomechanically. If it's not possible and it's a morphological constraint, then yes, we have to abide by that. But one of the other things we always think about is it a neurological constraint? Like, so for Jeff's example here is, there's nothing that's making you do that. The first question is, are you aware you're doing it? And if you're aware, can you just mentally make the change? And if you can, great, done, solved. There was no bike fitting issue. It was just, you didn't even know. And how many people don't know they're not driving their heel?
Right.
They just don't know. They didn't know they were supposed to. Once you tell them, they're like, hey, so a lot of times their posture and stuff is just because they're unaware. It's not due to the bike. It's not due to anything else. So that's a big part of it too, is just knowing.
My one caveat to that, though, is as someone who has hip impingement, like FAI, hip impingement, right? And we have corrected it. And I had external rotation of one hip and internal rotation on the other hip. I couldn't sit cross-legged as a kid. I mean, I was the janky hip girl. And my very first cycling coach, I won't say he forced me, but he encouraged me to pedal with my knees forward. And I've heard many of the Peloton instructors say that as well. And in doing so, I think that's how I tore my labrum in both
possible
hips. Because I forced my hips to go into a range of motion that was not normal, and not knowing that I had this for many, many, many years. I'd go to a yoga class and think I wasn't flexible, which is my muscles, versus having a different range of motion. My mobility was different. And so I would say, if something doesn't feel right, listen to your body. Don't force yourself to do something that maybe is not symmetrical for you. My symmetry is different than most people's symmetry. My range of motion is different than people's range of motion. So definitely pay attention to that as well.
Yeah. What I want to see is
symmetrical.
I want to see a repeated motion, right? I want to see the repeated motion, especially of your knee path, of the same motion down and up for the
So
most
if I'm
part.
pedaling like this,
like
that's
if I
okay.
right?
And if I'm
I
like
want
this,
to
it's okay. But
exactly.
if I'm like this, no, that's
Not
not
good, right?
okay.
And that's the thing is,
Yeah.
depending on your pelvis position as well, as we rotate our pelvis more forward, right? We will get internal rotation of the leg. It's
Hmm.
connected. Or as we rotate in, you still get, and we used to be taught back in the early days of, you used to polish your top tube because your knee should
Right.
rub up against the top tube, right?
Well, one of mine does.
Well,
But the other
you're
one
doing it half
doesn't.
right. But no, we do want
Exactly.
straight for the most part.
Yes.
And
But as Larry said, what's the float is a benefit. I always say it's a feature, not a bug, right? So having 9 degrees of float in the Peloton um, Delta cleat system is great because it allows you to self-select based on your range of motion.
Mhm.
But we do have to think about tracking, right? So I want to track in a line, basically, right? Track versus allow this free play that then can cause injuries to hips and knees primarily. So yeah. Anyways, we can talk lots about bike fit. But again,
Yes,
and
we can.
I just have to encourage you, if you haven't had a bike fit, even if it's just to spend, hey, you get to talk to me and Brian for 45 minutes, and you know how valuable that is.
Which usually takes an hour.
Right. Well, at least for me it does because I have chatterbox. Even though you guys are like, man, Brian talks a lot, doesn't he? He does.
I do.
And I just smile because he says all the things I would say.
I have a lot up in his head that I
He
gotta get out.
does. And he's
Plus,
alone all day long.
it's just me and my dog.
I know. So, anyways, I think that will conclude our our topic for this week, which was efficiency. And there's lots more we could talk about, but I think this was a really good start. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. I just want to see if there was anything else. Oh, Linda had said something. Let me go back and find it. About coming in a little too hot on a corner. And I would say, I'm not sure if you're still here, Linda, but wow, that was a long way back. Yeah, coming into a turn too fast. So what are the things that I want to think about outdoors? First of all, I want to understand my route, and I hopefully have my navigation and I'm planning for that. As I approach a turn, I want to make sure I'm in the appropriate gear to exit the turn. I want to make sure that I'm going to control my speed going in, whatever speed that is for you. I brake before my turn, not while I'm leaning the bike, not while I'm in the turn. So those are kind of the key points of approaching our turns. It's okay to go into a turn slower. That's fine. But I want to pay attention. So what happened in this case? Well, the turn came a little sooner than you thought it did. And so you can control your speed or keep going as long as it's safe to do so. You don't want to run a red light or a stop sign. But yeah, and cadence does play a role. I remember when I first started racing crits, I had this bad habit of going into my turns and putting more resistance on the bike, right? Pushing into a harder gear, which is silly because you can't turn your legs over coming out of the turn.
Yes.
And
Cadence
ideally,
first, then power.
we're racing, pedaling through the turn. And then when you don't, people yell at you. So it just takes time. The more time we ride outside, Linda, the better our experience is going to be with that.
The general rule is always like control your speed going in, be in the speed you want to be going into it. Now, if you've gone in too hot, like you've like, oh no, this was definitely faster than I should have. Do not slam on your brakes.
Right.
Because
once
you
lose
slam,
traction,
your bike is, also your bike will stand up, right? As you brake, your bike's going to stand up. When your bike stands up, it's going to go straight, which takes you off the turn, right? Over the ledge.
Into the ongoing traffic or over the ledge. Or into
so the key is feather your brakes. Very light feather if you're trying to scrub speed, and then just lean. And remember, you're going to go through this. Most of us are going to go through the turn at a speed that we think is very fast. A pro cyclist would go through that turn probably 2 times faster than you.
Mm-hmm.
The
bike can handle it.
Can handle a lot more than we think. So a lot of times it just comes into, oh shit, I'm scared. Lean it. Just lean it. The bike wants to stay upright. The bike doesn't want to fall over. Like, I would rather see somebody just kind of commit to it and try to lean instead of trying to brake too hard, because and I said this to Francesco at Steamboat, because we're on gravel on this huge tandem, which we had never done before. And I said, listen, if we come into a turn too hot and I think we're going to lose it, I'm just going to yell, lay it down. And what I mean by that is we want to go low side, not high side. So if I'm in a turn and I'm already here, it's much easier for me to let my bike slide out from underneath me and just basically slide into second base. If I brake what's going to happen is it's going to stand up and it's going to throw me off and over the bike, which is going to be much more painful. So worst case scenario,
let's not even get there.
lean,
Let's
lean,
go
lean,
back
and
Yeah.
slide out.
And
I'm
I
saying
would
if you're
say,
in it already, you're
I
in,
know.
it's hot, what's your option?
Now,
Because that you got to
what I would
practice it. You got to
say,
know it. You got to know
you
it.
got to learn counter steer, right? So that's the key. If we back up before all this, don't get into that oh shit moment. Learn how to counter steer your bike. We're not going to describe this now because we've been talking forever.
That's next time.
But take a skills clinic, learn how to counter steer. When we learn how to counter steer any one element of that skill, which is weight on the outside pedal, inside hand, the bike is leaning, the body's leaning the other direction. I point with the knee, I push with the thigh, I'm looking with the chin. Any of those, if you do them a little more, is going to correct your mistake. So ideally, we don't break it all. We use any of the components of counter steering, but you got to learn how to do it. You got to practice doing it. So for those of you who ride outside as well, find yourself a skills clinic or a skills coach who can teach you the fundamentals of riding your bike, because it ain't like when you were a kid. The stakes are a little higher and the baggage is a little more. And now we're thinking intellectual individuals. So we got to learn the skill set.
And practice turns. Practice them. Find the same turn. Do it 15 times at different speeds. And then find a tighter turn, a wider turn. You know, they're all different. You know, riding in Europe and riding in the US, totally different. Taking turns, totally different. Trying to find the apex and how late is the exit and stuff of that nature all plays in. So practice.
Jeff made a good point. He said, Lorri and I had some good sandy turns on Sunday. He heard me giggling like a schoolgirl so many times, like, woo, that was fun. Because you hit something that you don't really see, the sand that we were riding on. And he had warned me. He's like, oh, this is super technical. I'm like, what's technical about this? And he's like, sand. And it was very slippery. It was different than what I was used to. And, you know, when you get into that situation, it's like, pull up on the bar, let it ski through. He just wrote the same thing. Yeah. So you ski through, weight on the back, wait. I kept saying to myself out loud, weight the pedals, weight the pedals, weight the pedals, because it was just so different. So yeah. Anyways, but this is going to turn into a 90-minute podcast before we know it. I'm going to say a couple more things and then we're going to say sayonara, baby. This weekend, we've got our first set of live rides with Matt. So live ride this week is at 8 a.m. I think next week it's at 8 a.m. too, but I'll check the calendar. We'll do an on-demand at 11 and at 2. Those are all based on Eastern time. I know some of the chats are also talking different times. So throw your time out there. If you want to ride with teammates, make sure you use the hashtag Team Wilpers Cycling. And then you can find each other on the leaders board. And I'm not sure I have anything else to say about this week, except it's going to be a good week. Next week, you'll notice as we get into our rhythm, we're doing our Power Zone or our Power Zone Max rides on Tuesday. Wednesday, if you do the optional ride, they're typically going to be all Zone 2. And thank you, Linda. I'll update the calendar with that 7 a.m. Eastern. Oh, gosh, those schedules. Anyways, Thursday is another Power Zone Endurance. But as you're learning, Power Zone Endurance doesn't all mean the same thing. When we do our Wednesday ride, we want that nice, easy Zone 2, don't go hard. Thursday rides typically are going to have a little more Zone 3 in them. So anyways, that's about it. It's going to be a good week of training. You guys are already killing it. And it's really nice to see some good results already based on the training that you did in the last 2 challenges. So good job, everybody. Anything about the roadside we need to mention?
No, similar to this past week, we're adding a little bit more VO2 on our Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday's recovery ride, Thursdays are Thursday threshold. So basically you have a 20-minute block and a 12-minute block broken up into different percentages, to keep it interesting. Friday rest, Saturday, we're just adding more tempo into our long rides. We're just taking those 80% and kind of dragging them out a little bit longer. And again, if you want to extend your ride, extend the Zone 2 portion, not the Zone 3 portions.
Exactly.
More
fitness, less fatigue.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's about it. But another good solid week.
Awesome. Okay, everybody. It was great to see you. Thank you for joining us live. We appreciate it. For those of you who are watching later, you miss all the fun. And that's it. Hey, no glitches today. Let's see if I can glitch now. I'm going to hang us up. Good night, everybody.
Bye, guys.